I fought the HOA that destroyed my dad's home to discover he was their biggest investor. How would you feel when you learn the company you are fighting is being covertly funded by your own family? The rumble of heavy machinery woke me up at 6 a.m. on a Tuesday. I stumbled to my window sleeping, blinking from my eyes, to see a yellow bulldozer tearing into the empty lot behind our house. My coffee mug fell from my grasp, shattering on the hardwood floor. "Dad!" I shouted, dashing downstairs. "Someone's uprooting our buffer zone." My father Richard was already out on the back porch in his bathrobe, scowling with confusion. For 30 years he'd owned that property behind our house. He'd bought it just so that there would be some space between our house and the community center. "This has to be a mistake," he complained, pulling out his phone. "No one is going to be able to build there without my approval." I watched his face fall as he dialed and dialed and dialed. Something was wrong. Really wrong. 5 equipment vehicles had destroyed half of the green space by lunchtime. Employees had drawn lines with bright orange spray paint, curving suspiciously into what I knew was our property line. When Dad and I approached them, they simply pointed at their work orders. "Maple Grove HOA Gym Edition." One employee shrugged. "Talk to management." Dad's hands were shaking as we walked towards the community center. He'd lived in Maple Grove for 40 years, helped create it from scratch. Everyone knew Richard Hamilton. Everyone looked up to him. Or so I had thought. Eleanor Thompson's office door was shut when we got there. Through the frosted glass, I could see her silhouette perfectly straight back, even when she was sitting. When Dad knocked, she made us wait 3 full minutes before saying, "Come in." "Eleanor," Dad started. "There's been a terrible mistake. Construction crews are digging on my property." Eleanor barely raised her eyes from her desk. Her perfectly highlighted blonde hair didn't move as she shook her head. "Check your boundary lines, Richard. The town needs a bigger gym, and the board voted last month." "I wasn't notified of a vote," Dad said, indignation growing. "And that land is an HOA property. I purchased it myself in 1987. Eleanor once looked at us, her smile tight and practiced. "The records show otherwise. Perhaps at your age, memory becomes selective. My father is a lot of things, but forgetful is not one of them. The man remembers the birthday of every person he's ever met." "Show me the records," he boomed. She pushed a folder across her desk. Inside was a property map with new boundaries and a paper with my father's signature, approving the sale of the buffer zone to the HOA. Dad's face turned white. "I didn't sign this." The board meeting was on March 12th. "You were there." Richard Eleanor's voice was full of insincere concern. "Your name's all over our funding papers. Maybe your daughter should think about your health condition more carefully." That night, there was a thunderstorm rolled in Maple Grove. I woke up to the noise of water. Not rain, but rushing, gurgling water. Tracing down to our basement, I stepped into 3 inches of floods. Cracks had formed in our foundation, where it joined the back wall, right where the building had been excavating all day. When I called Eleanor at home, she answered on the first ring, as if waiting for my call. "Destruction of property isn't something an HOA would be worried about," she said before I could explain. "You'll have to contact your insurance. Your building moved our foundation." "Make it happen," she said brusquely, and hung up. Dad sat on the stairs down to the basement as the water inched up around his stored photos and trinkets. He felt smaller, somehow, older. "Something isn't right," he breathed. "My name is on their papers of funding. But I never signed off on this expansion." "What are you stating?" "Your name is on their budget." Dad turned away. "I've been funding the HOA off the books for years. Anonymously, nobody was supposed to know about it." Before I had a chance to process this news, a deafening crack shook the house. We tore outside in the rain to find our backyard broken. In 2 right down the middle water, running out as the earth beneath it shifted. A text came through on my phone. "Emergency HOA meeting tomorrow, 9 a.m. All residents are required to go fines for non-appearance." Dad stared at the wreckage of our pool, rain dripping on his pajamas. "They said this would occur," he whispered. "They knew, and they went ahead and did it anyway." I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my kitchen table, wondering how the neighborhood my father helped build had turned against him so completely, and why. The community center buzzed with whispers when Dad and I walked in the next morning. Friends we'd known for years suddenly found the floor fascinating. Mrs. Patel, whose daughter I'd babysit through high school, actually spun around when I motioned to her to enter. Eleanor stood by the podium, dazzling in a blue pantsuit. "Even at the late hour, we've come to speak of the exciting news on our new state-of-the-art fitness center. she announced, flipping through to a photo of a shiny glass building that read Maple Grove Wellness Center boldly across it. Not a mention about our flooded basement. No acknowledgement about our destroyed pool. My father waved his hand across. Eleanor pretended not to see him for 10 excruciating minutes before finally acknowledging him. That building has destroyed my property, Dad declared, and it's being built on land, which is mine. Murmurs swirled through the throng. Eleanor's smile never flickered. I explained to you yesterday, Richard. The boundaries were changed legally last month. Your name appears on the documents. I never signed anything, Eleanor scoffed theatrically. This is exactly what we needed in order to keep the community from experiencing things like this. She clicked to the next slide, where a document dated and signed by Dad appeared. As for your supposedly damaged property, our contractors meet all safety guidelines. Any structural fault that existed at your house before would by all logic belong to you yourself. Dad got up, swaying lightly. Eleanor, stop deceiving me. I never. His speech ended abruptly as he clutched his chest, staggering forward. I barely caught him before he hit the ground. Someone get an ambulance, I screamed. As paramedics rolled Dad into the ambulance 20 minutes later, I noticed Eleanor and 3 members of the board standing in a group watching from across the car park. Not one of them reached out to help. Your father's had a mild heart attack, the doctor told me some hours later. He'll require rest and absolutely no stress. I laughed bitterly. That's impossible at present. When I returned home that night, water was seeping through our front lawn. The building had somehow hurt our water main. Our driveway had new cracks radiating like spider webs on the concrete. And attached to our front door was an HOA violation notice, $750 fine for unattractive property damage. Repairs within 7 days. I crumpled the notice in my fist and marched back to the community center when I was determined to demand some answers. The building was dimly lit, except for Eleanor's office. Through her window, I could see that she was sitting with a man in a nice suit. Her husband, Thomas Thompson, whose name I suddenly remembered, owned Thompson Construction, the company that is building the gym addition. A voice behind me made me jump. They're meeting with the bank to obtain financing. I turned to find Martin Wilson, our 15-year neighbor, standing in the shadows. His face was worried. What's happening, Martin? Why are people acting so weirdly? He nervously glanced over at Eleanor's window. The HOA is broke, Sarah. We've been operating in the red for years. Eleanor convinced everybody that this gym is going to save us. An upscale facility that will improve property values and attract affluent new homeowners. But that doesn't cover. Your dad's property was the only possible site. Martin wouldn't even look at me. Eleanor found out he's been the mystery donor keeping this going. She thought he wouldn't mind paying a bit more. My head was spinning by acquiring his property. Martin shrugged uncomfortably. The board had voted democracy in action. My dad sat on the board. He never voted. He skipped that session, hospital visit. Eleanor had reported Dad was having routine tests done that day. Someone had plotted all this out. I returned home to find 3 more violation notices pinned to our door. The new one left me gasping for breath. Pool violation, improper drainage, environmental hazard. $2,500 fine. They were searching for us for the pool they had destroyed. Inside, I found Dad's home office in disarray. Someone had clearly been digging through his files. The safe under his desk swung open empty, except for one folder marked HOA funding. I opened it. Shaking inside was evidence that my father, through his investment company, had actually been the HOA's biggest financial contributor for decades. But with recent papers were also included copies of his signature that looked off, slightly different from his real signature on older papers. My phone rang with a text message from an unknown number. Storage room behind kitchen of community center. Tomorrow, 2 p.m. Come alone if you want to save your father's house. Water was flowing through our ceiling lights. The shaky ground beneath our home was breaking us apart piece by piece, and somehow I felt that this was merely the beginning. The jackhammer's relentless pounding woke me up at 5:17 a.m. Not even my pillow could muffle the noise of the construction site that was once our peaceful buffer zone. I stumbled to the window, eyes bloodshot from another sleepless night, and saw workers pour over what used to be our land. They're rising earlier and earlier, I complained, knowing this was a breach of county noise ordinances. I grabbed my phone to record the time-stamped video, more evidence for our growing case. Dad sat at the kitchen table, hands shaking slightly as he tried to clasp his coffee cup. The continuous noise had got to him, making him turn his usual assured standing into something brittle and hesitant. The furrows of concern on his face had etched deeper these past few weeks. "I spoke to the Mitchells yesterday," he grumbled. "They're our neighbors of 12 years, and now they won't even meet my eye." I nodded, recalling how the Mitchells' children had learned to swim in our pool. "Everyone's taking sides, and they're not taking ours." The doorbell rang. My stomach knotted. These days, visitors never came bearing good news. I opened the door to see Mark Wilson, whose daughter had thrown her sweet 16 party in our backyard just a year ago. "Your sprinkler is striking my driveway," he stated bluntly without saying hello. "The HOA is very much concerned with water conservation." I emerged from doors, bewildered Mark. "Our irrigation system is toasted because construction created cracks in the pipes. We've not giddy it for weeks." "Then, fix it," he snapped. "And when you're doing that, what's about fixing cracks in your drive?" "They're unsightly." My patience dissipated. "Those cracks are from your precious gym. Building destroying our foundation." You know that Mark's face turned cold. "Your family is rich enough to fix a few cracks. Stop being selfish when it comes to community improvements that everyone gains." As he stormed away, I saw a number of neighbors standing on their porches and windows. No one waved or smiled. These people who had shared holidays and barbecues with us for years now treated us like the enemy. Back in the mail arrived. I read through it and my blood pressure went up. 3 separate HOA violation notices, each with huge fines. Untidy property destruction. I read to Dad aloud. Inadequate landscape care. Inadequate water drainage. Dad accepted the letters in trembling hands. "This is nuts. They're holding us responsible for the destruction they caused." I took my jacket. I'm going to stand up to Eleanor in person. This has got to end. Dad reached for my arm. "Please don't. Your anger will not do you any good." "I'll be okay," I swore. The HOA office was abuzz with activity. Plans for the gym addition filled the walls with slick renderings of smiling families enjoying facilities built on what used to be our land. Eleanor Thompson sat behind her desk, her elegantly styled silver hair setting off a face which otherwise would have appeared grandmotherly had it not been for the cold eyes. "We're being fined for damages due to construction caused by you," I said, depositing the violation notices on her desk. "This has to stop." She barely even glanced at the papers. "The violations were recorded by our compliance officer. If you have problems, you can appeal at next month's board meeting. Next month, the construction is destroying our home now." Eleanor smiled coldly. "Perhaps if your father hadn't insisted so strongly on the expansion, at first accommodations could have been made." "My father never approved this project. You forged his signature." Her smile didn't flinch. "Serious charges require serious evidence. Your father's been disoriented recently? Forgetting discussions? Agreements. Perhaps you should focus on his well-being rather than fighting for community progress." Looking around the office, I noticed some neighbors who'd been friends for years intentionally ignoring me. They'd all known they'd gone to board meetings, heard the plans, seen the documents with Dad's dubious signature, and never said anything. I stormed out of the office full of rage as I walked home. I heard the unmistakable rumble and crash of heavy equipment. Running the last block, I pulled up just in time to see a large crack running down our driveway, like a lightning bolt through concrete. The construction foreman shrugged when I accused him. "Ground shifts. Not his problem if your land can't withstand a little vibration." That night, I spent hours on the phone with our insurance company, which was already denying claims regarding damage caused to it by construction because of earth movement and municipal activity. As night fell, the house creaked and groaned around us, as if struggling to stay upright, while below it, the earth was shaken. Dad flinched at every new sound that reverberated through our house. The next morning, the sound was all the louder Dad went out into the yard to work in his peaceful oasis. For years, I was in the kitchen window and saw him kneeled uncomfortably beside his tomato plants, fighting to stabilize. Abruptly, he touched his chest and collapsed. I let go of everything and ran. "Dad." He couldn't speak, his face white as he gasped for breath. I dialed 911 with shaking fingers, cradling his head in my lap while we waited for the ambulance. The sound of the construction never ended, coercing me to scream the address to the emergency operator. As the ambulance finally arrived, I noticed Eleanor and some members of the board standing on the other side watching. Not one of them came to help or even ask if Dad was okay. The paramedics moved quickly, loading Dad into the ambulance, possible cardiac attack. One of them told me, "We have to move fast." The hours in the hospital turned into a haze. Tests, questions, more tests. When the doctor finally appeared, on her face was stern. Your father is stable, but he had a stress-induced cardiac event. His heart is stressed. He needs total rest and a stress-free environment. I almost sneered at the hopelessness of that prescription. It was past midnight when I finally drove home, weary and apprehensive. As I approached our street, I noticed something was wrong. Our porch light that I had left on was dark. Inside, nothing worked. No lights, no water. With my phone flashlight, I found a notice stuck on our door. Emergency water main repair because of construction damage, service disruption expected. For 24 to 48 hours. They had shut our water and electricity without warning. When Dad was in the hospital, I sat in our dark, silent house and for the first time, finally let myself cry, wondering why the people we'd known all these years were capable of turning on us this completely. Then my phone rang with a message from an unfamiliar number. I've seen what they're doing to your family. I want to help. Meet me tomorrow at the coffee shop on Main Street. James, I gazed at the message, not daring to hope. Who was James, and could I trust anyone in this neighborhood anymore? The coffee shop filled with mourning customers felt like another world in contrast to the quiet battlefield our neighborhood had become. I glanced around the room nervously, unsure who I was searching for. A man in a crisp blue shirt raised his hand from a corner table. You must be Richard's child, he said as I approached. I'm James Rodriguez. I leased the yellow house on Cedar Street last month. I examined him closely. Why did you call me? How did you obtain my number? James slid a business card across the table. I'm an attorney who specializes in property rights, and I got your number from Mrs. Diaz. She's worried about your family, but too scared to help openly. My throat constricted at the understanding that at least one of my neighbors still cared. Why would you help us? You barely know us. Because I've seen it before, James said, his face tightening. In my last neighborhood, our HOA president bullied through a swimming pool project that inexplicably employed his brother-in-law's construction firm. By the time we uncovered the kickbacks, 3 families had lost considerable property value. Hope flickered for the first time in weeks. You think that's happening here? I know it is. James opened his laptop. Eleanor's husband owns Pinnacle Construction, the firm doing your gym expansion. I've been monitoring their permits and applications. There are irregularities over the course of the next hour. James walked me through what he'd discovered. Rushed permits without environmental impact studies. And most importantly, property line mistakes. Your father's property was reclassified at a time when county records show he was hospitalized for his knee surgery. James described waving his hand over timestamps on electronic filings. The signatures don't match his other legal papers. That's what we've been saying. They forged his approval while he was under anesthesia. We require additional evidence. But this is a decent beginning. James closed his laptop. With your dad's original deeds and my law experience, we have a case. For the first time in weeks, I felt something besides hopelessness. Dad has all the originals placed in his house office. Flawless. We must move swiftly before they try to burn proof. HOA board members tend to panic at the prospect of fraud charges. James walked me to my car, telling me what we'd do next. I'll research the county's construction permit history while you obtain your father's documents. We'll meet at my house tomorrow. Disclosing this will make a difference. My phone rang as he was speaking. It was our older neighbor, Mrs. Diaz, her voice shaking. You must return home right away. There is water everywhere. I broke every speed limit running back from the end of our street. I could see disaster. Water gushing out of the ground where the workmen had been digging, flowing like a river straight for our house. I abandoned my car and ran the final 100 yards. Mrs. Diaz was standing on her porch, pointing frantically. They hit a water main about 20 minutes ago. Nobody did anything to redirect it from your house. Water was already ankle deep in our basement. When I got inside, I waded through desperately trying to save what I could. Dad's home office was hit worst, file cabinets over papers, a flaunt on rising water. The very papers we required were dissolving before my eyes. I worked desperately piling boxes onto top shelves. But saving everything was impossible. Outside, I could hear the work crew finally shutting off the water main. Hours too late, as I carried armloads of water-soaked papers onto the dining room table, trying to dry what I was able. A sharp knock on the door, Eleanor Thompson, holding an HOA violation notice. Improper water drainage, she stated, trying to peer around me into the house. The association can't have standing water on properties. It's a mosquito breeding hazard. I glared at her, speechless with rage. You're finding us for your water main break that your building caused. Rules are rules, she said, smugly, and not maintaining the premises. Properly drained costs a $500 fine. Due within 30 days, I ripped the notice into pieces, crumpling it up in my fist. Get off my property. That's very inconsiderate, Eleanor tooted. Oh, and last night, the board voted to increase monthly dues by 25% to cover surprise construction cost overruns. The new pay plan begins today. After she stormed off, I named James. They're hurting us financially and damaging our property. I explained, voice breaking. And some of Dad's original documents are ruined. Don't give up, James said firmly. Write down all of it. Take pictures, videos. Save every notice. I've been in touch with other neighbors who've had the same thing done to them with this board. You're not as isolated as they make you think. That evening, I visited Dad in the hospital trying to hide my red-rimmed eyes. He wasn't deceived at all. Tell me what happened. He insisted I told him everything. The flood, the destroyed papers, the mounting fines. To my surprise, Dad smiled weakly. They think they've won, he said, but they don't know about the safe deposit box. My heart skipped a beat. What safe deposit box at Pinewood Credit Union? I've copied everything. Important property documents there because we moved. The key thing is in my dresser drawer, hidden in my old cigar box. I squeezed his hand, hope again. Rising. Dad, you're a genius. Not a genius, just cautious. His expression became somber. The doctor tells me that I can go home tomorrow. They're holding some grand opening event for that gym in the near future. I want to be there. But my heart is breaking. Watching our house come down under protest. Fighting back is the best medicine today. Next day with Dad, home safe and recovering. I stopped at the credit union to see James. The documents in the safe deposit box were exactly what we needed. Original surveys, markers of property lines, purchase agreements. And most of all, Dad's original signature on dozens of documents that obviously didn't resemble the fake ones. This is better than I hoped, James said warily, taking a picture of each document, and I was able to locate 3 former board members who would attest to Eleanor's strong-armed tactics. And I also found the county inspector who approved their permits. It turns out he's Eleanor's nephew. We worked late into the evening at James's kitchen table, building our case. Other neighbors began to secretly get in touch with us. The Wilsons' teenage daughter visited the grocery store, whispering that her parents apologized for turning against us, but they feared punishment by HOA. Mrs. Diaz invited us to dinner and played recordings of board meetings where Eleanor had waved off complaints about property lines. Our coalition was growing, but so was the risk. Construction progressed to breakneck speed. The gym was nearing completion, in spite of blatant corner cutting that would make the building unsafe. The grand opening was promised for the following weekend, barely leaving us time enough to settle our legal affairs. Eleanor sent a especially ugly invitation aimed at Dad, inviting him to attend as our generous patron. We're going, Dad insisted when I showed him the invitation. They think they can shame us into hiding. They're wrong. As we prepared for the festivities, our evidence for the ceremony, and for filing legally. James had the following Monday. Dad spoke with me in private. Whatever the outcome, he said, remember that a home is more than walls and property lines. It's the integrity you bring to it. The night before the ceremony, I couldn't sleep. Standing in my bedroom window, I watched the hastily constructed gym looming in the distance behind our cracked pool deck. Its foundation already developed hairline fractures where they built too quickly on unstable soil. At that moment, I understood we weren't just battling over our property. We were battling for the soul of our community, and tomorrow would determine which would stand and which would fall. My hands shook as I helped Dad with his tie. Do you really want to do this today? I asked. His face looked pale against his dark suit. I've never been sure of anything, he replied, his voice frail but steady. They think I'm too sick to fight back. Let's show them how wrong they are. The community center buzzed with excitement. Red and gold balloons floated against the ceiling. A large banner read, Grand Opening Pinewood Heights Wellness Center. The name made my stomach turn. They'd even stolen our family's name for the land. We'd always called it Pinewood Point. Eleanor Thompson stood at the entrance in a crisp blue suit, greeting people with a champagne glass in hand. Her smile vanished when she saw us. Richard, she said, insincere concern dripping from her voice. Should you be out of bed, we might have taken you photos of the ceremony. Dad stood tall. I wouldn't miss this for the world, Eleanor. James Rodriguez appeared beside us holding a thick folder. All set, he panted. We had seats in the back row. The chairs were packed to capacity with neighbors. Some gave us frosty stares, but others looked away in guilt. I spotted Mark Wilson fidgeting uneasily when he saw us. Eleanor tapped the microphone. Welcome everyone. Today is a milestone for our community. This state-of-the-art gym will make our property values stronger and bring us all closer together. People clapped. I squeezed Dad's hand. None of this would be possible without our benefactors who are so generous, Eleanor continued, especially Richard Barnes, whose investment firm has backed our HOA projects for years. Whispers circulated around the crowd. Some of them turned to look at us in surprise. And now Eleanor rose to say, I'd like to invite Richard to make a few remarks about this wonderful addition to our community. Dad slowly got up. James handed him the folder and walked him up to the stage. The walk felt like an eternity, each step slow and painful. Eleanor's smile became strained as Dad walked to the microphone. She tried to grab the folder away from him, but he wouldn't release it. Thank you, Eleanor. Dad spoke his voice for once, stronger than I'd ever heard in months. I do have something to say about this gym. The room was quiet. This building sits on stolen land. My land. Dad opened up the folder and held up a document. These are the original land surveys when I purchased this lot. 20 years ago. Eleanor tried to cut in Richard. Perhaps your medication? My medication has no bearing on fraud. Eleanor Dad's voice boomed through the speakers. During my stay in the hospital, someone forged my signature on these documents. He held up yet another paper. My signature on the authorization of utilization of my property and my investment funds for this development. Gasps filled the air. Eleanor's face did not change. It's absurd, she shouted. The board voted unanimously, based on forged documents. James stood up, shouted, I have already registered complaints with the county prosecutor and the state real estate commission. Eleanor grabbed the microphone. Security, please eject Mr. Barnes from the stage. He's clearly confused. 2 men in uniform approached, but some of the neighbors stood up. Let him talk, shouted Mrs. Patel from across the room. They rejected my request last year to add a wheelchair ramp, claiming it would depreciate property. Others chimed in, suddenly having the courage to share their own stories of HOA abuses. Eleanor's expression turned dark. This is a party, not a gripe session. I stood up with my phone high. I'm streaming this live to the community Facebook group. More than 300 neighbors are currently watching. Dad just kept bringing out more papers. The construction broke my property, cracked my pool foundation, ruined my basement, and cut off my water line. When we complained, we were given fines for the same damage the construction was causing. Eleanor marched over towards Dad, but James stopped her in her tracks. And here's the most interesting segment, Dad said, pulling out one final document. The construction company contracted to do this work is owned by Eleanor's husband. 5 board members accepted kickbacks for voting to pass this project. The room erupted into shouting. Eleanor stretched out for the microphone, but it fell from her grasp, crashing to the floor with an ear-splitting shriek. In the momentary silence that ensued, we all heard it. A screeching crunch of concrete. The brand-new rear wall behind the stage broke apart. A jagged line shooting from floor to ceiling. Everyone out! James yelled. The foundation is collapsing. People stampeded to the doors. I struggled through the crowd to reach Dad, who just stood and watched as Eleanor's immaculate gym came crashing down on her. You've ruined everything, she shouted at him in the midst of chaos. Dad just shook his head. No. Eleanor, you did that yourself. As we stepped outside, more cracks showed up along the front of the building. The crowd that had gathered in the parking lot gazed in horror and fascination. Mark Wilson approached us, his face white. Richard, I didn't know they were doing this to you. They said you'd okayed everything. Dad nodded wearily. It's amazing what people will tolerate when they want something badly enough. A police car pulled into the parking lot and was followed by a TV news truck. Eleanor tried to dissolve away, but James drew the officer's eyes to her. This isn't over. She spat at them. You've won, but you don't know who you're messing with. The front of the main doors collapsed with a thunderous boom and sent up a cloud of dust. Sirens wailed in the distance. I walked Dad back to our car, his energy depleted. Are you all right? I asked. He looked back at the collapsing building, then at Eleanor being interrogated by police. I will be, he said uncomfortably. But I can't help think how many other neighbors has she done this to who were unable to defend themselves. As we drove home, I seen Dad reading our house, absorbing the devastation that surrounded it. The cracked driveway, the empty pool, the ruined garden. Was it worth it? I asked him. Turned to me, his eyes sharper than they had been in weeks. Standing up to bullies is always worth it, he answered. But our fight is just beginning. Eleanor has powerful friends, and the HOA still controls much of the development. What happens tomorrow when the dust has settled and people forget their outrage? I didn't know what to do. As we drove into our damaged driveway, my phone was ringing with calls from neighbors I hadn't spoken to in months, suddenly wanting to know how they could help. Would their help be available when it actually mattered? The investigation moved at a slower pace than I wanted. 3 weeks after the gym collapse, we still lived in a cracked slab and a useless pool. Little things were happening everywhere that was around us. James called early one morning Tuesday. "Turn on Channel 7 News," he said, his voice tense. I turned on TV just in time to see Eleanor being led away from her home in handcuffs, the news reporter's voice narrated. HOA president caught on fraud, embezzlement, and permit violations. Dad limped into the living room with his cane for support. "Is that Eleanor we endured together?" as the reporter continued. The county prosecutor indicated Thompson and several board members embezzled over $2 million of HOA funds and created fake documents to build on private property. The camera panned to reveal other police cars at other homes in our neighborhood. Eleanor's husband was being arrested also with 3 of the board members. "They actually did it," Dad gasped. "They're taking them to task." My phone rang off the hook. Neighbors texting, calling, asking if we'd seen the news. Some apologized for not believing us before. In the late afternoon, someone knocked at the door to bring forth Mark Wilson and about 20 other neighbors waiting on our beat-up driveway. "We want to help," Mark shrugged sheepishly. "We brought equipment, materials, whatever you need to start to repair things." I looked at them suspiciously. "Why now? Where did you assist us earlier?" An older woman whom I knew to be Mrs. Patel elbowed herself forward. "Because we were scared," she confessed. "Eleanor intimidated anyone who stood in her way. She denied my wheelchair ramp 3 times, and then found me for trying to install it." Anyway, others nodded with similar kinds of stories. Dad came up behind me. "Come in," he simply said. "We have a lot to talk about." Our living room with plenty of neighbors greeting each other for the first time, even though they were feet apart for years. James brought pizzas and the latest news. The county's freezing all HOA assets, subject to investigation. He said they've hired a temporary manager to handle critical services. "What about property?" Dad asked. James smiled. "The prosecutor wants to see you tomorrow." They found the original property papers at Eleanor's residence intact. She did not rip them apart, but rather kept them stashed away for leverage some other time. For the first time in months, I started to feel hope sprouting up. The interim HOA manager turned out to be good. A retired judge named Martha Collins, who specialized in property cases. She held an emergency community meeting at the grade school gymnasium. "Your HOA has been operating illegally for at least 3 years," she told the packed room. Eleanor Thompson and her team tampered with records, altered votes, and embezzled funds. Angry voices echoed in the room. "What, something to our homes?" Someone wept. "Your homes are safe," Martha promised everyone. "But we need to replace a new board and review all the decisions made under the previous leadership." Neighbors suggested. James immediately. Others stepped forward, people who had been bullied under Eleanor's rule. Mrs. Patel waved her hand. "I suggest." Richard Barnes' father looked surprised. "I don't think I have the energy for that right now." "You don't have to serve Martha actively," she said. "We need your knowledge on the transition team to sort out the financial mess Eleanor has left behind." The rebuilding process started with our home. The county made Eleanor's construction company pay for repairs on our property. Workers came to fix our pool and foundation replant our garden and fix our water line properly. One morning when I was supervising the repairs, there arrived a county official with the original property deed for Pinewood Point. "It's legally back in your father's name," she said, handing me the papers. "The gym building will be demolished next week once the investigation team is finished taking evidence." I took the papers to Dad, who sat studying them with tears in his eyes. "What do we do with the land?" he finally said. 3 months later, on a sweltering Saturday, the community had again assembled, this time on Pinewood Point, where the illegal gym had stood. We now had a little park and community garden, with specially created wheelchair-friendly paths for Mrs. Patel's wheelchair. Dad cut the ribbon, his health improving. Day by day, now the stress was in retreat. "This park belongs to all of us," he said. not to anyone or any board to dictate. Martha Collins came over afterward. The prosecutor called a witness, Eleanor and her husband. They both pleaded guilty in exchange for reduced sentences. They'll spend at least 2 years and pay significant restitution. Will it be enough? I asked out loud. Money can't fix everything they ruined. Dad said, watching children on the new swings. Trust to fix is longer than it is for property. James just joined us officially now, the new HOA president. We've recast all of the bylaws. No decision relating to private property can occur without written consent on record from owners. And all the board meetings are recorded and archived online for accountability. As people gathered and broke bread at picnic tables, I saw something wonderful. Neighbors were actually interacting with one another, learning names, creating bonds that Eleanor's reign had kept out. Mark Wilson stopped by to visit my son, asked to help with your yard sometime. He misses coming by to swim. Dad smiled. The pool opens next week. He's always welcome. Later, as the sun went down, colored the sky, pink over our newly rebuilt home, Dad and I sat on our porch swing. Was it worth it? I asked again, remembering the question from months ago. Dad looked out over our property. Then at the community event in the park down the street. Look around, he said. We didn't just save our home, we saved our community. A car pulled up into Eleanor's old driveway across the street. A young family emerged. New neighbors moving in. Should we go? Say hello, I asked. Dad stood up stronger than he had been in months. Absolutely, and maybe warn them to join the HOA board too quickly himself. He winked as we approached to welcome the newcomers, I caught. Dad was right. We hadn't fought about property lines or money or principle. We'd fought over the right sort of community. One based on respect rather than power, on openness rather than secrets. Eleanor had innocently given us something invaluable, after all the chance to reinstate our society in the correct way from scratch.